For years, my husband and stepson drained me of everything I had, my trust, my fortune, even my sanity. They thought I was weak, a pawn to be used and discarded. But I refused to break. I was quietly plotting my revenge from the shadows. My one move turned their cruelty into their downfall, exposing their darkest secrets and crushing their twisted plans piece by piece. I faced every betrayal head-on, alone but unbroken. If you think revenge is simple, your opinion will change after watching this tale of betrayal. Part 1. I should have known something was wrong the second I stepped into the house. It was too quiet, not peaceful, unnatural. Usually the walls echoed with arguments between my husband, Marcus, and his son, Caleb. But that day, nothing, just silence, and that silence made my stomach twist. I moved toward the study, drawn by faint voices behind the door. "It's the perfect way," Marcus said, his voice calm, too calm. "She won't suspect a thing." I stopped in my tracks. My heart started pounding. Then I heard Caleb, cold, focused. "Are you sure the poison will work?" Marcus replied, slowly, "I don't want her dying too fast. Not before we get access to everything she owns." I froze. The blood in my veins turned to ice. I slapped a hand over my mouth to stop the gasp from escaping. My mind spun. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were planning to kill me, my husband, and his son, for money. Then the doorknob turned. I backed away fast, struggling to breathe. Marcus stepped out. His eyes narrowed when he saw me, but then he smiled, that sick, smooth smile I used to trust. "There you are, Ava," he said, "just discussing some business with Caleb." His tone was light, too light, like he hadn't just planned my murder. Caleb came out behind him, his stare slicing through me, cold, calculating. "Everything all right?" Marcus asked, his voice full of fake concern. His hand landed on my shoulder. It felt like ice. "You look pale." I forced a breath. My insides were screaming, but I kept my voice steady. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just a little dizzy." He smiled again. "Why don't you sit? I'll get you something to eat." Was this it? Was the food going to be laced with poison? Every step toward the kitchen felt like walking into a trap. Marcus moved easily behind the counter, as if this was just another normal evening. Caleb didn't speak, just stared, watching me like a wolf watches a rabbit. I sat there silent, heart racing. I watched Marcus hand me a glass of water. That's when I made a decision. I wasn't going to die. I wasn't going to let them win. I looked him in the eye and took the glass. My stare was a warning, but he didn't notice. His pride made him blind. "Drink up, sweetheart," he said. "You'll feel better soon." I raised the glass to my lips, but inside I was already building a plan. If they wanted war, they'd get it. The days that followed, I stayed quiet. I observed. I listened. I watched their every move. They acted normal, too normal. That calm only made me more determined to take them down. Then came the first break, my best friend Lana. We met for coffee. I couldn't hold it in anymore. The truth poured out. The plot, the poison, the fear. She didn't panic. She leaned in and said, "We need proof, Ava. Solid evidence." She was right. That night I went through our finances again. This time, I wasn't just looking. I was hunting. And slowly I started finding it. Missing money, hidden accounts, quiet debts that didn't make sense. Piece by piece, their betrayal came into focus. At dinner a few nights later, Marcus caught me staring at a statement. "You're into numbers now?" he said, smiling. But there was tension behind it. "Find anything interesting?" I looked up calm. "Just doing some cleaning." He didn't push, just nodded and kept eating. That fake calm only made me more sure I was on the right path. Over the next weeks, I kept up the act. Sick, tired, fragile. Staying home gave me time to dig deeper. Every transfer, every signature, they were all noted. Lana helped me stay focused. "We're close," she said one night, scanning the files. "Soon we'll have everything." The more Marcus smirked, the stronger my fire burned. He thought I wouldn't fight back, that I'd roll over. No, his ego would be his end. But Caleb, he was different. His hate wasn't hidden. It bled from every glare, every word. One day he passed me in the hall and muttered, "Better watch your step. Wouldn't want accidents." He didn't even try to hide the threat, but I wasn't afraid of him. I wasn't weak. They wanted a victim. I'd become their worst mistake. With Lana by my side, I kept digging, exposing every dirty secret they tried to bury. Soon, I'd have everything I needed, and when the truth came out, I wouldn't hide in fear. I'd be ready. Every day I played my part like a pro. The quiet wife, the harmless woman. They never saw the storm coming. Part 2. I became the perfect image of a weak, sick wife, someone too drained to be a threat. That was the role I played, and I played it well. My disguise let me move through the house like a ghost, barely noticed, quietly watching, quietly planning. Marcus didn't suspect a thing. Neither did Caleb. They thought I was slipping, fading. "You look extra pale this morning," Marcus said one day over breakfast, pretending to sound concerned. But I knew better. He didn't care. He barely looked up from his coffee. His words were hollow. I gave a weak smile. "Just feeling a little off lately." He shrugged and went back to his toast. "Well, get some rest. We've got the Benson event this weekend. Can't have you passing out in front of clients and embarrassing me." His voice was sharp, full of judgment, not a hint of compassion, just control. I clenched my jaw, but I stayed silent. Not yet. Losing control would ruin everything. In the days that followed, I leaned deeper into the role. I moved slower. I coughed more. I made my hands tremble just enough. The bags under my eyes were real. I hadn't slept in days, but I used them like tools, signs of a woman falling apart. The more pitiful I looked, the more invisible I became. One afternoon, I shuffled into the living room, holding my side like I was in pain. Caleb was on the couch, flipping through his phone. "You look like death," he said with a smirk. I sank into the chair across from him. "Must be that stomach virus that's going around," he scoffed. "Figures." Then he stood and left without another word. No pity, no concern, just that same cold, disgusted glare I'd gotten used to. I waited until I heard his footsteps disappear down the hall, then let the mask slip. My back straightened, my mind spun, my heart burned. Every cough, every sigh, every faked stumble was part of the act. But under all that weakness was a storm building inside me. Their arrogance would be their undoing. They thought I was broken, but I was sharpening my edge with every passing day. Lana helped me from the shadows. She connected me with her trusted people, quiet professionals who specialized in clean exits. A new identity was being built in silence, new documents, new accounts, a clean record. When the time came, I'd vanish without a trace, but I wouldn't go empty-handed. "You've got to hold on a little longer," Lana whispered during one of our secret meetings. "I will," I said, nodding. "Just make sure everything's in place." She squeezed my hand. "It is. When the time comes, you'll be ready." Her eyes were filled with determination, but I saw the fear too, fear for me. She knew what I was walking into. Back home, Marcus and Caleb grew colder. Their usual snide comments turned into long silences and strange looks. They'd glance at me, and then at each other, like they were waiting or planning. Did they know something? Had I slipped? Were they just biding their time until they made their move? The questions circled my mind like sharks, but I didn't let it show, not once. I kept playing the part. The night before the Benson event, the pressure tightened. We sat at the dinner table in silence. Marcus looked at me over his glass of wine. "You don't look well enough to attend tomorrow," he said. "Might be best if you stay home. I'd rather you not collapse in front of our guests." His smirk was subtle, but I caught it. He thought he was winning, that I was too broken to fight back. I gave him a tired nod, lowering my eyes. "I understand." Inside, my heart was beating like a war drum. This was it. The calm before the storm. The last quiet night before everything unraveled. They thought they'd crushed me. They were wrong. The next morning, I stayed in bed as planned. Marcus left early for the event. Caleb followed soon after. I waited, counted the minutes. Then I got to work. I started planting small traps, just enough to start cracks in their foundation. A faint scent of a woman's perfume on Marcus's jacket. A lipstick stain on his white collar. Whispered calls to Lana at night while I stood just outside their bedroom door, pretending to cough. Piece by piece, I painted a picture of betrayal. It worked. Caleb was the first to break. One evening, he slammed the door open and stomped into the dining room where Marcus was sipping scotch. "Who is she?" Caleb shouted. Marcus looked up, annoyed. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," Caleb snapped. "The lipstick, the perfume. I heard your phone calls. You think I don't know?" Marcus stood up, his voice rising. "Are you accusing me of cheating?" "I'm not accusing. I'm stating facts," Caleb spat. "You're lying to both of us." The air between them turned toxic. Shouts filled the room, heavy with blame and fury. Years of resentment spilled out all at once. "You're pathetic," Caleb hissed. "You used Mom, and now you're doing the same thing again," Marcus roared, slamming his fist against the table. "I built this life for you, and you turn on me like this?" Their voices blurred into one long scream of anger. I stood just outside the room, listening quietly. Every word was music to me. This was my masterpiece. They were tearing each other apart, just as I had planned. The arguments didn't stop. They only got worse. Day by day, the walls shook with their yelling. The house, once full of cold silence, now echoed with chaos. I didn't even need to say a word. I just watched the cracks spread, watched the foundation split. While they fought over lies I had fed them, I kept preparing. Lana and I finalized every detail. The money was moved. The documents were ready. A safe place was waiting. But I wasn't done yet. I wasn't just going to escape. I was going to leave them in ruins. They wanted to destroy me to gain everything I had. Instead, I'd take everything from them. Money, trust, power, and leave them with nothing but suspicion, hate, and the taste of betrayal. Their punishment wouldn't come in a courtroom. It would come from within. The night before my final move, I sat alone in the dark kitchen, staring at the empty dinner table. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from restraint. The rage in me had grown quiet, focused. I had become something else, cold, precise. They thought I was a victim. Tomorrow, they'd realize I was their reckoning. Part 3. It was time for the next step in my plan, the final push that would break them completely. I waited in silence as the tension between Marcus and Caleb thickened like smoke in a burning room. They avoided eye contact, barely speaking. Each word that did escape their mouths sharpened with bitterness. All I needed was the right moment, one spark to light the fire that would tear their bond apart forever. And when it came, I would be ready, calm, composed, and lethal. That moment arrived one quiet evening at dinner. The air around us was thick with unspoken rage. The sound of clinking cutlery echoed through the room like ticking bombs. The only conversation between Marcus and Caleb came in the form of muttered insults or long, venomous stares across the table. I sat between them, small and fragile as ever, pretending to be the helpless, sickly woman they thought they'd broken. Twisting my fingers in my lap, I cleared my throat just loud enough to draw their attention. They both looked at me, irritation etched deep into their faces. I'm afraid I have some troubling news, I whispered, my voice trembling, my eyes downcast. Marcus narrowed his eyes. Out with it, he snapped. Don't waste our time. I took a shaky breath and hesitated, just enough to seem unsure. It's about the other woman. The words exploded like a bomb. Caleb pushed back his chair so hard it screeched. His eyes lit up with bitter triumph, like he'd just been handed the proof he needed. You lying, cheating bastard, he spat at Marcus, fury vibrating in his voice. I knew it. Marcus shot up from his seat, red-faced and shaking with rage. What the hell are you talking about? The late nights, the secret calls, the perfume. You've been sneaking around behind our backs, Caleb shouted, pointing a shaking finger at his father. Before Marcus could answer, I slid a crumpled photograph across the table. It was one I had carefully staged weeks ago. Marcus with a woman, blurry enough to raise suspicion, but clear enough to suggest intimacy. He grabbed the photo, looked at it, and his face contorted into fury. This is a lie, he shouted, slamming it down so hard the table trembled. A twisted, malicious lie. Is it? I asked quietly, my voice soft but accusing, because it would explain so much. I stared straight at him, letting a tear slip down my cheek. The late nights, the strange perfume, the whispers when you thought I was asleep. His jaw clenched. For a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Guilt, panic, whatever it was gone a second later, replaced by a mask of rage. You smug little traitor, Caleb roared, standing up so quickly his chair toppled over. You've been playing us this whole time. And just like that, chaos erupted. Marcus lunged across the table, fists flying. Caleb met him head-on. They slammed into each other like wild animals, crashing to the ground in a flurry of fists and roars. Their screams echoed through the house, words lost in fury, accusations shouted through clenched teeth. I didn't move. I just sat there, calm, composed, watching them unravel. This was the fire I had sparked, the storm I had summoned. Let them destroy each other. After everything they did to me, all the lies, the control, the cruelty, this was justice. This was what they deserved. I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Marcus pinned Caleb to the floor, one hand around his throat. Caleb gasped and writhed, his face turning a deep shade of purple. The sound of choking filled the room. For a moment, I froze, not out of concern, out of calculation. Then I calmly reached for my phone and pressed record. Let the world see them for who they really were, monsters tearing each other apart. When it was over, they lay sprawled on the floor, bruised and bloodied, gasping for air. The dining room looked like a battlefield, chairs overturned, a shattered glass on the floor, a trail of blood where someone's hand had grazed something sharp. They stared at each other with hatred deeper than I'd ever seen. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and stood up slowly. Well, I said, my voice even. That was quite the performance. They both turned to me, faces twisted in pain and confusion. You've given me a lot to think about, I added, a cold smile playing on my lips, especially when it comes to my will. Their eyes widened. Finally I saw it. Fear, not for me, for themselves, for what they might lose. Let them wonder. From that moment on, the house was like a grave. Silence hung in the air like smoke after a fire. Marcus and Caleb moved like ghosts, haunted by guilt or rage. I didn't care which. They avoided each other, avoided me, barely spoke. They knew the storm wasn't over. I had more planned. With Lana's help, the next phase began. It started with a call from Dr. Austin. He was the family doctor, kind, reliable, and more importantly, completely in the dark about the web I was weaving. Lana helped me dress the part. I leaned on her arm, walking slowly, as if I could barely hold myself up. Dr. Austin greeted us with concern, his brow furrowed as he looked over my test results. I'm afraid the news isn't good, he said softly. I widened my eyes. What do you mean? What's wrong with me? He shook his head gravely. Your condition. It's more advanced than we thought. I'm so sorry, Elena. Lana gasped and clutched my hand, perfectly playing her part. I bowed my head, hiding the small smile tugging at the corners of my lips. This was all part of it. Dr. Austin had no idea he was just a piece on my board. Soon after, Marcus and Caleb were called into the office for what they thought was a family medical meeting. They walked in looking grim, but cold. Always cold. Well? Marcus asked, his tone sharp. What's the diagnosis? Just get on with it. Dr. Austin glanced nervously at me, then at Lana, who sat beside me with tears in her eyes. It's serious, he said slowly. Terminal. The disease is progressing rapidly. Silence fell. I peeked at Marcus and Caleb from under lowered lashes. Neither flinched. Their faces were carved in stone. No sympathy, no regret. It was almost comical how heartless they were, and perfect. They had no idea this was only the beginning of their end. Part 4. The tension in the room was unbearable. My disappointment hung in the air like a thundercloud, thick and impossible to ignore. But Marcus and Caleb just sat there, cold, stiff, their faces unreadable. Like carved stone, they gave away nothing. Not a twitch, not a blink. For a moment, I almost believed they felt nothing at all. I took a breath, slow and deliberate, letting the silence stretch. Then I broke it, my voice soft but firm, cutting through the quiet like a knife. Given the situation, I said, letting just a hint of tremble enter my tone to sound weak but honest. I've decided to update my will. The changes are effective immediately. That got their attention. Marcus's head snapped toward me. His eyes narrowed sharply, the way a lion looks at prey just before it strikes. "Oh," he said, a twisted smile curling his lips. His voice was smooth as silk, but there was poison beneath it. "And just what changes are you planning, dear Elena?" I coughed, weak and rattling, the kind that sounds like it came from deep within the lungs. Then I doubled over in my chair, as if the weight of illness was suddenly too much. Slowly, I straightened up again, pale and shaky, my hands clutching Lana's arm for support. Her presence was steady beside me as always. Marcus's jaw clenched. A muscle twitched in his cheek, just for a second, but I saw it. A flicker of the storm brewing behind his fake charm. I met their eyes, one by one. "My entire estate," I said clearly, the weakness gone from my voice, "will be donated to Amnesty International after my passing." Silence. Thick, heavy, suffocating silence. It felt like the oxygen had been pulled from the room. I watched their faces drain of color, both of them stunned, pale as ghosts. They didn't speak. They couldn't. Their minds were scrambling, trying to make sense of what they'd just heard. Their carefully constructed futures had just been ripped out from under them. For years, they treated me like a helpless burden, like a key to riches they didn't deserve. They spoke of me like I was a task, an obstacle, never a person. Now, in a few quiet words, I had shattered everything they had schemed for. Their confusion was almost pitiful. Almost. This was just the beginning. A taste of the chaos I had planned for them. A prelude to the finale I had worked on for years. I had been patient, but it was nearly time. The days that followed were even darker. The house, once cold, became a cage of tension and desperation. Marcus and Caleb slinked through the hallways like hunted animals. They barely spoke. When they did, it was sharp, suspicious. Every sound, every creak of a floorboard made them flinch. Their once calm movements had turned nervous, jittery, and erratic. I watched from a distance. I didn't need to intervene. They were unraveling all on their own. Their greed, their fear, and their growing anger were consuming them from the inside out, like rot spreading beneath the surface. They had no idea that every step they took was pushing them closer to their downfall, a downfall I had designed. I had survived everything they had done to me, emotionally, physically, mentally. Now I saw the damage they'd done reflected on their own faces. Their arrogance had crumbled into desperation, their pride into paranoia. Sometimes their frustration exploded. Screaming matches echoed through the halls. Furniture slammed against walls. Doors were kicked shut with enough force to shake the walls. It was chaos, pure and wild. After the shouting, they'd retreat to opposite corners of the house, stewing in silence, likely planning their next move. One morning, Marcus lost control completely. He slammed his fist against the kitchen counter, the force so strong that the plates rattled and one nearly fell. "You deceitful witch," he shouted, his voice full of rage. "This is your revenge, isn't it? Finally showing your true colors." I stared at him blankly. My pale face gave him nothing. No emotion, no guilt, not even satisfaction, just emptiness. He stormed toward me, circling the kitchen island like a wolf cornering prey. The smell of whiskey and sweat clung to him, heavy and sour, but I didn't flinch. I didn't answer. I turned away, moving with slow, deliberate steps, like the sick, weak woman I pretended to be. Let him rage. It couldn't touch me anymore. The worse my supposed condition became, the more unhinged they grew. Objects flew through the air. Vile insults spewed from their mouths, but I stayed silent. Lana was my shield. Her steady presence grounded me. Her soft words reminded me to hold strong. "Stay the course," she whispered one night as we sat in the guest room, listening to Marcus and Caleb scream at each other behind the closed door. "They're falling apart, Elena. You can see it." And I could. Every day it became clearer. Their desperation was written on their faces and burned into their eyes. And I'll admit it, I felt a dark sense of justice. After all they had done, they were finally suffering. But it didn't end there. Strange visitors began arriving. Men in dark clothes with cold eyes and heavy steps. They never stayed long. and their conversations with Marcus and Caleb were always quiet, too quiet. I couldn't hear everything, but I didn't need to. The desperation in their hushed voices said enough. It was no longer just about the money. Now it was about power, control, the need to dominate me, to crush the will I had dared to write. And in their growing madness, they became more dangerous. Their eyes lingered on me in strange ways, calculating, feral, inhuman. But I wasn't afraid. Every glance, every scheme, every desperate move, they only brought them closer to the edge. They were falling into the trap, deeper and deeper, and I was just waiting for the final snap. One afternoon, I returned from a walk with Lana. As soon as I stepped into my bedroom, I knew they had been there, drawers left open, clothes thrown carelessly across the bed, my jewelry boxes emptied, documents scattered. They had searched through everything, looking for something, anything to overturn my will. Or maybe they just wanted to take what they could before it all slipped away for good. Either way, it didn't matter. Their frantic rummaging was the final sign. They were finished, drowning. And I was the calm eye of the storm, watching them sink. Then came the final day, quiet, almost peaceful. I sat in the living room, and once again Marcus and Caleb stood before me, shouting, threatening, their faces twisted in rage. "You'll regret this," Caleb screamed. "We'll fight it. You won't win." But the moment he finished, the front door opened. Heavy boots stepped inside. I turned my head slowly. 2 officers entered the room, firm and calm. "Marcus Grayson, Caleb Grayson," the lead officer said, his voice stern. "You're both under arrest." Time froze. Silence, then confusion, then chaos. "This is ridiculous," Marcus shouted. "On what grounds?" "Fraud, extortion, attempted murder," the officer replied. He glanced at me, and for a moment our eyes met. There was understanding in that look. He nodded slightly. "I'm sure the charges will grow once we process all the evidence." Marcus and Caleb shrank before my eyes, their confidence shattered, their empire of lies crumbling. And I just sat there, still calm, satisfied. Part 5. I'm sure the list will only get longer as more evidence comes in. The officer's words echoed in the room like a final nail driven into a coffin. I watched as the weight of those charges pressed down on Marcus and Caleb like a landslide. The bravado they had clung to so tightly vanished in an instant. Their shoulders sagged, their faces pale and contorted with panic. The arrogant men who once held power over me now looked like frightened little boys caught doing something unspeakable. Caleb's eyes burned with rage as he whipped his head toward me. His face twisted, jaw clenched, every inch of him shaking with fury. "You," he hissed, his voice cracked and feral. "You did this, you vindictive." His outburst never reached its peak. One of the officers pulled him back sharply, pushing him against the wall with calm force. Caleb growled like a wounded animal, but he could do nothing. The control he once flaunted was gone. All that was left of him now was a broken man, furious and helpless. I stood perfectly still, my back straight, face emotionless. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I simply watched as their lives unraveled right before my eyes. Marcus and Caleb, the masterminds of manipulation, the puppeteers of torment, were finally stripped of their illusion. There was no more power for them to wield, no more lies to hide behind. This wasn't the dramatic, fiery ending I had once imagined. There were no screams echoing through the halls or blood spilled across marble tiles. No grand spectacle of violence. Instead, it was a quiet, measured takedown, precise, unforgiving, and in that silence, it was perfect. The officers began escorting them out. Marcus tried to resist, struggling against the arms that held him, but it was no use. He threw a final glare my way, eyes full of hatred, trying to penetrate my calm with the force of his rage. But I felt nothing. No fear, no sorrow, not even pity. Only a deep, resounding sense of release, like poison being drawn from a wound after years of festering. As the door closed behind them, it felt like the house exhaled. Lana stepped out of the corner where she had been silently observing. She came to my side, placing a warm hand on my shoulder. "It's over, Elena," she said softly, her voice like a balm on raw skin. "You're free now." I nodded, though the meaning of her words didn't fully settle at first. It was surreal. After everything, after all the mind games, the silent battles, the years of manipulation, it was done. Justice had arrived, not with chaos, but with clarity, with finality. And yet, I felt no triumph, no rush of victory, just a stillness, a quiet space inside where their presence used to haunt me. The darkness they cast was gone, and in its place was emptiness. But it was a good kind of empty. The authorities began moving through the house, documenting every piece of evidence I had so carefully collected: financial records, hidden documents, secret recordings, and most damning of all, the plan they had concocted to slowly poison me and steal every penny I had worked for. With each box sealed and every report signed, it felt like another chain being broken. When the last officer left, taking with him the weight of months of secrets, the house transformed. It was lighter, the silence no longer suffocating. For the first time in years, I could breathe without fear clawing at my throat. Later that evening, I heard a knock. I opened the door to see Dr. Julian standing there, his face drawn with guilt and confusion. He looked as though he'd aged 10 years in a single day. The moment he stepped into the house, I saw it all in his eyes: regret, remorse, and a dawning realization of just how deep he'd been pulled into the web. "I don't know what to say, Elena," he said, his voice cracked. When I realized, I raised a hand to silence him. There was no anger in me, just cold clarity. "Think nothing of it, Julian," I replied, my voice calm even. "You were just a pawn in a much larger game." His eyes flickered with relief and discomfort. He had expected blame, perhaps a confrontation. But I had none to give. The part he played had ended. The curtain had closed. "I'm sorry I had to involve you," I continued, turning slightly away. "But it was necessary." Julian swallowed, the truth hitting him hard. "So it's all true," he whispered. This was all planned. A setup to reveal them?" A faint smile touched my lips. Not of joy, but of understanding. "A woman has to protect herself, Julian. Surely you understand that." I left him standing there, stunned and speechless. The delicate, sickly woman I had pretended to be was gone. I shed her like a skin that no longer fit. In her place stood someone far stronger, someone who had stared into the depths of betrayal and emerged whole. I walked toward the balcony, letting the late sun warm my face. The estate stretched out before me, familiar and yet transformed. The shadows that had clung to it had finally lifted. The air felt different, clean. For the first time in years, I could see a future that wasn't clouded by survival or fear. This was my new beginning. No more lies, no more manipulations, no more pretending. I had won, not with violence or vengeance, but with patience, precision, and the quiet strength of knowing who I truly was. And now that the truth was free, so was I. As I stood there, the sky began to shift from gold to dusky rose, the first stars twinkling overhead. The world moved on, unaware of the war that had just ended inside these walls. But I knew, and that was enough. This, dear listener, is where our story finds its close. Thank you for walking this dark, twisted path with me. Thank you for believing that even in the shadows, light can rise again. If you felt the weight of this journey, if you too longed for justice, for freedom, share your thoughts below. And if this story has touched something within you, don't forget to like, share, and follow. The past is behind me now, and ahead, only light.